But actually here we can see that some have started throwing, the police have lobbed tear gas on one side of the estate where the protesters had converged, and we shall be bringing you more information as we get to know what will be unfolding here. Back to you.
So phone, the situation there is a bit different. It's not
wa bidhaa kati ya mataifa mbalimbali. Komole amesisitiza kuwa hatua hiyo itatatua tatizo la usalama pamoja na kubuni nafasi za kazi miongoni mwa vijana.
With the establishment of the border post, we will be able to, as a county government of West Pokot, benefit from the employment opportunities which will come alongside the construction of that border post. Number two is easing of trade activities along between the two countries, that is Uganda and Kenya. As we speak now, we have a lot of challenges because movement of goods and services from the two countries has been very difficult because of lack of that the border post. Because we had to move around to the Swamp border where there is an established border post which is very far. So we are trying to reduce the distance of movements of goods from Kenyan side to Uganda and from Uganda to Kenya, and therefore encourage trading activities within the two countries.
Halmashauri ya kupambana na majanga nchini imezindua ujenzi wa mabwawa 6 na vidimbwi vya maji vya thamani ya shilingi milioni 65. Akishuhudia miradi hiyo,
kuna walemavu wachache wanapata hizo pesa, lakini wengi wamefungiwa nje. Na ndio sababu wakati ule nilisema nataka tujirejiste. Niko na majina tayari na nimeshazipeana.
Na hapa wengi wakikiri kuwa japo wamejitokeza bado wanahangaika kupata huduma muhimu. Aidha, serikali ikitakiwa pia kuhakikisha afisi zote zinafikia viwango vya kuwezesha walemavu kuzuru afisi hizo wakitafuta huduma muhimu.
Ya kwamba tuko katika short recess, lakini baada ya siku 14 tunaenda kuwaita viongozi wenyu wote wakuje pale kwenye bunge muone mimi mwenyewe nikipiga nyundo na kusema ya kwamba
the masses, because realistically, if you are to compare the last 24 months, if you have been going to the fuel pump, if you've been buying food, let's talk about specifically fly and everything else, and cooking fat and everything else, you'll realize that the margin is almost not as big. Bar for unga, which has actually been fluctuating, and we are already heading, for those of us who come from the far west of this country, we are already into the harvest. So in the next 1, 2, 3 months, there's going to be a glut of maize. And again, we will mismanage that and we will not talk about that. So, Michelle, can we be honest about this conversation? We are stuck in August last year. That is the truth. As much as we want to talk about this being the cost, about the cost of living, if you were to take away Raila's discontent with the elections, you are unlikely not to have the situation we have today. So we can go around and make noise, but this is the truth, that William Ruto and his acolytes who are in power today are considered, if we are honest, outsiders to the political elite of this country. So what is happening is that a group or a section of the political players who feel like they're entitled, this is their birthright, are bullying him and his team. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, on top of what Raila is actually making noise about, number one, you remember that when he started this maandamano, the cost of living was not on top, and we had that discussion here where we were saying the real issue here, the cost of living was number 3 then. They were talking about IBC reconstitution, Jubilee and the others. Now, the cost of living has gone up because it whips the masses very easily. So he knows what he's doing. And we can go round and round and round, but if we're going to have a honest conversation, if today there is an agreement between William Ruto and Raila Odinga, you will not see people on the street.
Right. I mean, Alex, do you agree with that? Because, you know, for many Kenyans, even if the margin on the cost of unga hasn't gone that high, that 10 shillings, that 5 shillings, makes it a big difference. Do you agree?
I don't agree with him because, number one, this thing is all about Kenyans and the government, not Raila. Because if you go to Western, you come from Western, I also come from Western. There are demonstrations, people are demonstrating. Life is hard. People cannot even afford luxuries or leave alone luxury, food. Things are tough. So this one is not about, you know, the biggest problem that the president made when he came to power. If I were him, the best thing that I could have done, the idea of increasing the prices of commodity, fuel, whatever, it's okay. You know, by the end of the day, we have to pay tax. I'm a businessman. We do pay tax. But the approach, he could have taken at least a year or two in the office before he started increasing. But for now, even the hustlers are blaming this government. So it's not about Raila. I was in Kenya Kwanza, but right now I've joined the demonstration because I've closed 2 of my companies. Yeah.
Right, so the cost of living and the cost of doing business has taken a huge hit. And Arnold, you say that the protests may not be entirely because of the cost of living, but they certainly have put a lot of attention on the cost of living. Will they have an impact on government policies? Using
Raila's own words, this is a conspiracy of circumstances. It happens that the cost of living, and it's not actually unique to Kenya. Also, if you were to compare our situation today with the other people in the region, you will actually realize that the cost of living and even inflation in the regions, we do not compare to any, including those that are actually down. If data was anything to go by, the cost of living here, if we're talking about escalation, I think in Rwanda it should be about 0.4 much higher than us. In Tanzania is about 0.6 much higher. In Uganda it should be about 1 point something higher. Those are absolute numbers, and you know numbers don't lie. Not manufactured by us or KNBS, but other independent institutions. This is a conversation that we can go around and scatter around it, beat around the bush, but this is it. On the day there is an agreement, if Raila was still at the AU, he would not have disrupted the AU meeting happening in Nairobi today. That is a fact. If Raila was not the one who is spearheading this particular maandamano, Munya and Martha Karua are not even able to put up. Have you heard of any maandamano in Kirinyaga ever since Martha? Martha is actually the principal, the second in charge of this particular end. One of those things you see, and there are a lot of circumstances that make some of these things look like they are pronounced. So we have got about 50,000 people today frustrating a nation. I'm talking about the people who are protesting across the country. They are not even more than 50,000 if we were to be very we were to be honest. Look at those small pockets of people. When I was leaving home, just at the shopping center next to where I live, there were a few young people who were throwing stones. I came all the way to town. Of course, there's a heavy police presence. But the truth is that from Busia to Mombasa, from Kisii in Nyamira, in Migori, on the other side in Kehancha, all the way to Garissa. One thing is actually very significant. Raila's strongholds are actually demonstrating harder. And for them, as much as we don't want to actually face, no one is denying that the cost of living is actually out of place. But what no one really wants to put this in is to put it in context that number one, it's not unique to Kenya. Two, it did not begin today. It's not a doing of the Kenya Kwanza administration. A lot of the noises and the eloquence around the economy and about the state of the nation that we now hear and see from people should actually have been said about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'll remind you, by the time we breached the Public Finance Management Act ceiling on borrowing, at that particular time it was at 55% of the GDP, we had a sitting parliament. That, and you know that a budget is a legislative process. We had a sitting parliament that did not raise a finger. They did not speak up. When we went on a borrowing spree and messing up, in the last 5 years, we had a handshake government, which Raila, for example, was part and parcel of. When William shows up, and this is one thing I keep on saying, all politicians by design are very populist. If a politician can actually find a shortcut to please the people, they will do it. William Ruto, who has been a career politician for most of his life, definitely knows that. And we also know that on the other side of his left hand is a very populist streak. he cannot just wake up overnight and he starts coming up with policies that are actually making the nation look the way it is.
Right,
There's definitely a reason to that particular end. So whether we go left or right, this is the truth, Michelle, that we are in the streets today because a section of the political class still feels discontented. They've not moved away from the elections. What they are doing is that there's a conspiracy of circumstances, and part and parcel of that is the cost of living. We are now making noise about things that we should have made noise about for so many years ago. So, is William Ruto 100% to blame for what is happening? No. But is he innocent of this? Definitely no, because he is the president and the buck stops with him.
Right, the buck does stop with him, and remember, he pretty much was propelled to the presidency under the promise of increasing or lowering the cost of living, making life 100%. Better for the hustlers.
He rode to power.
Already suffering. So we have the opposition now saying that he is no longer speaking and addressing the hustlers who are now coming up to express their discontent.
He rode to power on the promise of actually making things easier. Has he been given time to do that? Definitely no. You cannot be, you in an election, you are hauled to court. After that, you have got mandamano every single day. Everything you do is countermanded. You do not have, you see, for every regime, we can try to pretend here, for every regime, once you win an election before you start delivering, is something you call regime preservation. You are not going, without political stability, you are not going able to deliver. So, do you know what is happening here? The Azimio side has actually decided that they will keep this particular administration busy fighting all these so that they do not deliver. And once they do not deliver, then they will have the likes of Kidaki here, who now have crossed on the other side saying, you promised and you have not been able to.
Right.
There is no magician.
Please there's do, because a vibrant democracy needs a strong opposition.
I think there are things that this gentleman doesn't understand. I am in business. I'm a businessman. Let me explain to you.
So do I, actually.
Let me explain to you something. You know what is happening right now? Most of those middle scale traders, like the guys who import goods from China, from Turkey, they bring goods through Eldoret. Those people, do you know what has happened? The tax has increased with 50%.
When did it increase?
During Ruto's government.
You see?
Listen, let me finish. Let me finish. No. Let me finish. Let me finish. Listen. Let me finish. Let me just finish. Those guys are struggling, and those are the people who voted for Ruto government. That is number one. Number two, if you look at the pump price, if you compare Kenya and Uganda, as we are speaking right now, Uganda is cheaper than Kenya. And Kenya has a reserve of, in case we say that we are not going to bring any fuel in Kenya, we got a reserve for more, that can take us more than 6 months. And the Tanzania can only take them 2 weeks. So increasing the fuel overnight, you know, if you look at what the gentleman is telling us, you know, as business people, we understand. We know where the problem is. And the best thing that I can advise the president, I wish he can consult the business community. They will advise him.
Right, and just before you come into that, Arnold, you mentioned that you cannot increase taxes outside the finance bill. Yes. Let's talk about the issue of fuel then.
Let's talk about this. Number one, he talks about taxes having increased by 50%. What he has not done is to be fair to Kenyans and actually list which taxes have increased and under what regime. Remember that even as we speak, we are still under the Finance Act of 2022. Because the Finance, just a moment, because the Finance Act 2023 is still suspended. What did William Ruto do about fuel that has actually changed? He did away with the subsidies. What is the significance, the significant margin between when we have subsidies and when we didn't? Because you and I sat here and we had a conversation at that particular time when Munya had put in the flour subsidy, the winter subsidy. It was supposed to be there for 90 days. Up to now, he is in business. He told that millers were not paid them. We want to actually push a policy that is, we were borrowing elsewhere to actually fill up something that we didn't pay for. So it's a pending deal. We're talking about having a subsidy in fuel that has not been sustainable. Look at this. Even Nigeria, that produces oil. And for the first time, Tinubu has come in, and he's coming in and is telling us the politics of subsidies do not work. When he says that Uganda is actually cheaper than Kenya, he's also, that is not a like for a like. So when we do these comparisons, let's actually have some respect for real economics here. That Uganda and Kenya is not a like for a like. Two, Uganda does not have subsidy. Their fuel has always been slightly higher. If you know too well, because if you come from that particular end, you know that people sometimes have been crossing from Uganda to come and take fuel on this particular side on our own subsidy. So we want to play the politics of subsidies, and these subsidies, for a country that has got a physical deficit, we cannot afford. In the long run, we actually have got debts. We want to pretend that both the local debt, let's just talk about the national debt, is not something that is going to actually push us down. He is a millennial. If I look at him, he's a millennial like all of us on this particular table. We are that particular generation that is actually being burdened. The same constitution that you are defending speaks about generational equity. We are already overburdened by other people who made decisions. So we want to also continue on the same way and then move this to Generation Z and then the Alpha generation. That is unfair. And when we have got this conversation, we should be very honest. So long as everywhere there is a demonstration today, that Mama Mboga who earns his living out of selling on that particular day, they will go to bed hungry.
Right.
You cannot make the economy harder and then say you are fighting for those particular people.
Let me just take you to account, because when we began this conversation, you began by comparing the cost of living in Kenya to Uganda, but you still say Uganda and Kenya, you know, it's not a like for like, so we cannot compare the two. But let's talk about the subsidies that you speak about and the fact that, you know, there is economics to consider and there's various other issues to consider, but this has to be done in accordance with the law. So Kenya's High Court suspended the Finance Bill of 2023, which imposed a 16% VAT on fuel. That, withstanding, the prices of fuel still increased, an issue that is in court right now, courtesy of the Busia Senator Okiya Omtata. But did the government have to do this? Did the government have to do this in contrary to the law?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
Let me tell you something. Yeah? I heard, was it today or yesterday, Honorable Churchill saying that they are going to reduce the prices of fuel because they got some other suppliers like Gulf who are ready to supply us with fuel at a cheaper price. You see, the biggest problem that we are having in this country is that most of the people who are heading those areas, they are cartels. Those are people with interest. That is what is not telling us. Those are people with interest. Those are people who wants to make money out of those things. So what I can tell you is that Ruto is a very smart politician. And if you look at Ruto's politics, he's a politician who uses money to progress or to prosper. That is the game that he's playing. I heard him saying that opposition have not given maybe the government time so that they can deliver to wananchi. If Ruto really wants to deliver to Kenyans, if he delivered to Kenyans, definitely will not have this mandamano. Will not have the mandamano.
Actually, Michelle, just to tell you, I have got a friend of mine who's watching and is in Uganda. He actually tells me that the current prices in Uganda, the pump prices, are actually higher than ours, even as we protest. So it's not factual that the pump price in Uganda, today as we speak now.
Tell him to tell you how much, because I'm just from a meeting. I was meeting with the president of Iran. And what is happening right now, most traders, you see, the reason why the president of Iran came to Kenya is because they want to use Kenya as a gateway to do their business, to sell fuel. Because you see, you know the problem with Iran with the West countries. So they want to use Kenya to penetrate. But they realize they cannot sell their fuel here in Kenya. So they want what they want to do, they want to construct storage facilities so that they can sell. And I'm just from that meeting, and I
organized by this particular William you are saying, doesn't care about the cost of living.
Listen, what organized? The Iranian president.
As in, he doesn't show up on his own? That's diplomatic. So you actually got the follow from that
who is the biggest beneficiaries? They are Irans, not Kenyans. From the meeting, is Iran who are going to benefit.
We want cheap oil,
all right,
don't we?
Gentlemen.
Yes.
We want cheap oil,
not Kenya.
don't we?
Let's focus on.
They are not going to sell the fuel in Kenya. They are going to sell fuel in Congo, Tanzania, and Uganda, but not in Kenya.
Here, once it's here, as a business person, you know that there is a fall-off. When they are constructing here, we will tax them. There will be job opportunities that come with that. When people come here and whatever, as in that in and of itself, the trickle-down effect is money.
Right,
and that is exactly,
I'd like you to address the issue of the
that is why when
bill.
When William says that we are open for business, when the rest of the world is actually closing up to those guys and we can get opportunities on that, what's the problem with that?
Let's address the issue of the finance bill and why fuel prices had to increase despite the suspension of the finance bill.
Number one, the subsidy that we could not afford. You know, if I do not subsidize him to have this cup of water, he can pay 10 shillings. But for purposes of political expediency, I tell him, pay 7. Then I will do the the 3 shillings. That 3 shillings I do not have as GOK because no government has got its own revenues. So what do? We go outside to borrow, and when we borrow, we are borrowing 5. So what should have cost us 10 shillings ends up costing us 12 or 13 shillings.
Wangapi wanakaribisha Dr. Dbn Global.